And just a reminder, if you'll mute your computer or phone, if you have questions or comments, please put those in the chat box. Sandy Garner will be monitoring that. As always, the session will be recorded and posted. I appreciate everyone joining us again today. This should be a fairly short call. We have received no new information from Office of Special Education Programs in DC. In fact, a couple of our typical weekly calls from, for example, National Association of State Directors of Special Education have been canceled this week because there is no new information at this point as far as guidance from OSEP is concerned. But we did want to talk a little bit today about communication, the survey results, and we really appreciate everyone who responded to that. And then just a couple of reminders. As a reminder again, and if I pause every now and then when new folks log in, it's because I'm getting feedback and I have a really hard time with that. But Carolyn does a great job of muting folks as they come on. So communication, and when I say we, some of the staff at the Department of Ed in different offices have heard, as we've talked about the fact that there are rumors that are rampant out there, rumors among families and parents, school staff, district staff, even our state staff. And so once again, communication with all folks, particularly our parents, caregivers, and families, is critical, as we've talked about. We've gotten some communication evidently from folks like superintendents or instructional leaders that are hearing bits and pieces of information. So I would encourage you, as I'm sure you're already doing, to communicate clearly and frequently with staff at your district, to update your superintendents, your other instructional leaders with information. Again, all of our weekly calls are recorded and on the website as well as the PowerPoints. We're trying to share very consistent information across audiences. For example, those of you who were on our call last Wednesday and then were on the call with SCASA, SPED Leaders Roundtable, heard just about the same thing word for word that you had heard Wednesday. When we are asked in our office to share information, for example, with our Deputy Superintendent John Payne, to share with district superintendents or at its instructional leaders roundtable, I am typically sending him either entire recordings of calls that we've done or selected slides from calls that we've done. In other words, trying to ensure that every audience out there, whether it's instructional leaders with SCASA, Superintendent's Roundtable, whoever it is hearing the same thing. So I would encourage you to make sure that you're sharing the information with your district leaders, superintendent, instructional leaders, your title folks, and then also with your school leaders and ultimately with teachers to make sure that everybody is hearing the same things. Our initial communication priorities were around health and safety needs, student needs before compliance, and old process. And when I say that, what I mean is that we've got to put current student needs ahead of what we saw as our process in the past. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then clear and concise communications among all stakeholders. Our communication priorities now until the end of school will kind of if you can mute your phones or your computers. From now until the end of school, we need to be focusing on what the end of the year activities will look like in your district. What is graduation going to look like? And that is a district level decision. Um, and I have been following some of the decisions that have made around the area, knowing that districts are approaching this and getting feedback from each district stakeholders. One district met with all of their seniors and asked, what do you want to do? How do you want to do it? Another district has gotten input from seniors and family members in making decisions. And there are all kinds of different variations of graduations that are going to happen, all kinds of different timelines. Some districts are going to hold with their original timeline and do a virtual ceremony of some sort. I think one of the districts that I heard about recently was going to use a drive-in theater so that people could park socially distanced appropriately apart and listen to the graduation as the seniors walked across the stage out front. Others are going to hold them in their football stadium. Some are delaying their graduation ceremonies until August. Just lots of different decisions being made. And I know you are all a part of those decisions. The other communication priorities at this point have to do with kind of what your last 2 weeks of school will look like. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute, but how are students going to turn in materials, turn in books, collect um, personal materials that are at school and other activities relating to that, and how is your district preparing for that, for those kinds of activities? And how will students with disabilities be provided access to those kinds of end of the year activities? The governor's executive order that was issued on 4/27 talked about flexibility, and I highlighted that term. Flexibility allowed for the last 2 weeks of school. And so the first is your big if. If it is mutually agreed upon by both the district and parents, that's your first if. Then districts can hold parent-teacher conferences, IEP meetings face-to-face, assessments, evaluations, screenings, completion of industry credential teacher activities, service provision to students, and GED testing. And these are just a few of the things that could happen. This is not an all-inclusive list or an extensive list. But the first thing that has to happen is the district and the parent have to agree to that face-to-face contact. There are also some other things that are going to happen before this kind of limited face-to-face things occur, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So it could be that evaluations, for example, our 4K CERDEP classes are required to do an end of the year dial. I started to say a dial R. That really kind of dates me. I think we're on the dial 4 by now. But evaluation, they have that, they give the dial, the readiness test in at the beginning of the year as a pre-test and at the end of the year as a post-test. So assessments like that. If you've got a student that's in a welding course that needs to complete industry credentials and demonstrate appropriate welds, that has to be done. Those kinds of things have to be done face-to-face. You may have some IEP meetings that need to be done face-to-face. You may have begun evaluations or other parts of your assessments with reevaluations, particularly for our special ed folks that are on this call, that you may, again, if agreed upon by both district and parents, once some other conditions have been met, you may start to complete those kinds of things. There may be activities that teachers need to do be doing in the school setting to close out schools. There may be some direct service provision that needs to occur during this time, or again, or GED testing. There was a district level survey that was sent out, I think just last night, regarding the clean plan, how districts are going to decide to clean facilities to ensure health and safety COVID-19 related requirements. I understand that there have been some requirements that were set forth by the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control recently, but that these are going to be amended very soon. But what plan does your district have for cleaning the facilities? What items are going to be used to implement the cleaning plan? So make sure that you know what plan your district is developing or has in place, and communicate this kind of information to your families. And your staff. Your staff need to know, for example, if you're in the middle of an evaluation and you're contemplating that a school psychologist may be able to meet with a student to complete some of the face-to-face assessments. Make sure that you know and have communicated to the family, to your staff, what the cleaning plan is. And I know that we've got questions. I need to back up a moment. All right, Sandy, what kinds of questions do we have about this part so far?
Okay, so what our very first question is, does the flexibility that you've talked about for the last 2 weeks carry over into the summer as well, or will that be addressed separately, such as ESY, summer evals, etc.?
Again, that's an excellent question. I think lots of us have been saying that recently. And it just, for those of you who have known Barbara Drayton, the attorney in the Office of General Counsel who works with us on special ed, you know, she is famous for her prefix to an answer when somebody asks a question. And we could probably all say this together, but when you ask Barbara a question, her responses typically start with, "It depends." I think a lot of the answers to questions that we all have gotten asked, state staff and district staff lately, has kind of been, "Oh, that's an excellent question." And that usually is followed by, "Don't necessarily have the answer to that at this point." As far as we know right now, this is just kind of the end of school year activity part, and there will be additional guidance coming, we hope, very soon for what that looks like in the summer. Again, we've told you with your ESY decisions to kind of have 2 plans in place for students that the team has determined will need ESY services, and that's if we can continue this kind of limited face-to-face, again, with agreement from staff and parents, and then if we needed to deliver ESY virtually or some type of blended like that. Other questions, Sandy?
Yeah, so just kind of piggyback off of that. So they've been told that the 4K won't do the dial at the end of the year or any sort of end of year assessments, and that would still hold true even though they have flexibility the last 2 weeks?
That would be an Office of Early Learning and Literacy question. Let me see if I can get clarification on that, because when this guidance first went out, the example that was always given was the CERDAP 4K dial 4 testing. So that was the example that was used. So let me get clarification on that. And I'll send that out in an email.
And then one last question right now is, what happens if some districts agree to face-to-face meetings and others do not? The teachers are concerned kind of about safety, and some people have spoken about maybe wanting to do something that's consistent across the state. Any guidance?
Yeah, so in case you haven't noticed, South Carolina, as many states are, is a local control state, meaning that There are lots of decisions that are left up to the local district and superintendent, school board, district staff. This is going to be one of those. Again, the survey that went out last night is asking how the district is choosing to what plan the district has in place for cleaning facilities, because that's going to have to happen. You're going to have to at least have part of the facility cleaned, sanitized, whatever we're going to call that, before you can do any of this small group or let anybody in. There are going to have to be other things in place as well, and those are things that districts are going to have to decide on based on the recommendations and requirements from South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. As much as we would like to do things as in a standardized fashion as possible, this is not going to be one of the decisions that will be made statewide. If a district determines that there will be no access during this time, then that is a district decision, and that applies to everyone in the district. So it will not be discriminatory if a district says we are not comfortable doing any face-to-face. We cannot at this point ensure the safety of any of our staff or students in being able to do this. So we are not going to allow folks back into the building or anything like that for anyone. That kind of cross-the-board decision is up to the district and would not be viewed as discriminatory, because again, that is a cross-the-board decision that's made. All right, other questions related to this so far?
There's just a lot of discussion on the chat about, concerns about there's no way to social distance. How do we follow the DHEC CDC guidelines? It'd be impossible to do dial 4 with a preschooler and follow those guidelines. And then there's a lot of concern about, just trying to make sure that staff are safe. And then one more concern was that having a 2-week opening to do evaluations and that kind of causes another concern, which is parents who say, well, if you could do it these last 2 weeks, why can't you do it all summer? Why can't you do it at different times? So there's a lot of discussion, and I think we probably are going to need to look through the chat and maybe come up with some specific answers and put it on our facts page, because there's a lot of really great questions and concerns on there.
Yeah, and we understand that, and that's a good suggestion, Sandy. As these questions come up, we're sending them to our Deputy Superintendent, John Payne, who then discusses them with senior staff, the other deputy superintendents, Superintendent Spearman, and those folks. And so I have, I did just text John to ask if the flexibility for the last 2 weeks of school be extended into the summer. If he answers me before we're finished with this call, I will relay that, and then we'll update the PowerPoint to reflect that. But Sandy's right. I think that because, so I know that we have tried in these calls to address sort of special ed specific questions, concerns, and stuff, and that that's hard to do because our kids are Gen Ed kids first. The whole reason we exist with special ed is to provide access to Gen Ed. That's our whole purpose. That's what IEPs are for. That's what service provision is for, is that access to Gen Ed. And because there are still so many unknowns around Gen Ed, a lot of times our answers, when we're asked as a state agency, what are you going to do for students with disabilities? Our first response is always, well, what are we going to do for all students? And, tell us that. And then we'll talk about how our students with disabilities will be able to access that. How we will provide access to whatever that is. And so again, I will, if I get an answer to the flexibility extending into the summer, I will let you know before the webinar. If not, I will let you know as soon as we get an answer on that. And then we will talk as a staff about how to formulate more of this and put it out on the website in the frequently asked questions and responses. All right, a couple of reminders. We're getting conflicting information. And again, as a child, I played the telephone game or whatever it was called, where I whispered into Sandy's ear. She then whispers the same thing into Nicole's, who then whispers into Carolyn's, who then into Michelle, who then into Lonnie, who then into Tammy, who then into, and by the time we get around to Marietta, what I said to Sandy comes out as completely different from what whoever it was told Marietta. So I'm very well aware of how information gets passed and changed or doesn't get passed. So just a couple of reminders. We have heard from a couple of advocates that are out there that they have clients who are saying the district has told them that there will be no IEP meetings whatsoever until school opens. Or there will be, yes, I know your child was in the middle of an evaluation now, but there will be nothing else done on this until school openings. I know that y'all are working hard to communicate clearly with people, and this is just kind of a reminder. The department has never and will not, I know you have not and will not say that we are not holding any meetings at this point. I'm sure that y'all are telling your staff, just like we are telling anybody who calls. We're trying to communicate this same information again to instructional leaders, to superintendents, but that any meetings that we can hold through alternative means at this point, we are doing so. We are completing all parts of any evaluation or reevaluation that can be completed without face-to-face interaction. If we're in the middle of an evaluation and we need rating scales, we're doing those over the phone, or we're sending them, or there may be parts that can be done that don't require the face-to-face interaction. The other thing we're doing is explaining to parents that no, we can't give a whisk over the phone. That, and I can just, in my mind, hear all of the school psychologists out there laughing about trying to give a whisk over the phone or even on the computer. That's not, the assessments that we give are designed for a specific condition. And if we variate from those standardized procedures, then we have no faith in the reliability of the scores that we're getting. So, explaining all of that to parents, but also explaining that we will get back to the face-to-face components as quickly as we safely can for the safety of our staff and our children. And then, the flexibility beginning the last 2 weeks of schools to meet the guidelines for maybe completing some of the evaluation components or some of the other activities that require that face-to-face, if your district is able to do that. I did want to say, because we've had this question come up from a couple of parents, that if you've got a child in the middle of an evaluation, or you've gotten the referral and you're going to have an evaluation planning meeting, or you're in any part of that reason to suspect kind of gray area, to carefully consider that for any child in the process, to remember that you're in the evaluation process because you have a reason to suspect that child may have a disability, and to make sure that that reason to suspect is playing a major part in any consideration for retention. The department has given some guidance on retention and grading. More should be forthcoming. We also know that you don't decide fourth quarter in a school year to retain a child. That is, and I'm not getting into all of the research out there that shows retention does not work. I am a firm believer that in the research that shows retention is not the answer for the majority of our kids who are struggling. But if you are in a situation where you have a child that during the course of the year was being considered for retention and all of that documentation is in place, and you're now in the evaluation process or the eval planning process because you have reason to suspect this child may have a disability, please take that into consideration. So that could play out in several different scenarios. The child could be retained, and then you complete the evaluation and find out that the child had a disability, and that's what, and of course was not getting services for that disability until the evaluation eligibility was determined. So you really want to err on the side of caution with that, and just, again, kind of take that into consideration. Sandy, do we have any questions about that before I go into just a quick reminder about the differences in this next?
Yes, we do have a question. So it had to do with ESY. So what should they do concerning qualifying a student for ESY who was just qualified for services during the closure?
Good question. You would make that decision pretty much the way you would have made that decision otherwise. So let's say that you had an initial eval and initial IEP written February 15th for a child. And you were in the IEP meeting, you were delaying the decision about ESY. You can go back and look at your data from other breaks, or if that initial IEP was beginning February 15th, it may be that you would delay that ESY decision until the next annual review. It's going to depend on the data that you have for that child. And this is kind of a good lead into this next, just as a reminder that extended school year services are not summer school. Extended school year services are not this academic recovery or supplemental services. Extended school year services are required to ensure that with the services through the IEP you're providing that child needs those services through the break, whatever the break is, because remember, it's not just summer. It could be any break in instruction, typical break in instruction, so that child can make progress toward the goals to prevent significant regression. Again, all kids lose stuff in the summer with the summer slide or summer slump. We spend the first couple of weeks in school reviewing to kind of catch the kids up, to refresh their learning, and then we move on with new material. A child that needs extended school year after that summer break, even with that first couple of weeks of review, is not going to be able to pick up where he left off in working toward his annual goals because of his specific needs. And so that's how you're going to make ESY decisions. Again, they're all made individually. You look at regression and recoupment. So would this child regress so significantly without summer service or ESY services that he would not be able to, after review, recoup skills and pick up on new goals in the IEP? Is he at a critical point of instruction? Have you just started critical instruction for this student? And if you stop now, he would lose so much that you'd have to go back again to the beginning of instruction for him. And that may be what you're looking at with a student recently placed. For a student that's been in the program, again, use your student's progress and the data from the end of school. What was it like when he started school in August of 19? What was his progress like with winter break, with fall break, with spring break, those kinds of things. Other questions related to the reminders, Sandy?
One more question we have, it says, one director said that her OT and PT say they can't do teletherapy without specific consents and without specific training. Is there anyone or any way you could help provide more information on this?
I would refer you to the South Carolina Labor and Licensing, I always forget what the LLR website that has the information, and we gave those links in one of the first calls we did, so refer back to that with the links about what they need to make sure that that is true. Also have, you could reach out to the OT and PT South Carolina associations to see if they have some type of training already available for folks. I have not heard about those requirements, but I wouldn't necessarily have, so I will refer you back to the links in that first webinar to what's on the South Carolina LLR website. All right, I've just done the Just done the reminder about what ESY is. Remember that compensatory services are services that are awarded to students to make up for services that they lost because of an LEA's failure to provide an appropriate educational placement or services under IDEA. We are so far not talking about compensatory services unless, and would not be unless we have a situation where a district has completely failed to contact, to make reasonable good faith efforts to provide services. That might be a situation for compensatory services, or again, where you have let's say you've got a speech language therapist with a caseload and that SLP is actually sick or maybe had COVID-19 or some other illness that prevented her from providing any type of services to students on her caseload, and the district, for whatever reason, did not try to find someone else to provide those services. That might be a situation where we're talking about compensatory services, but remember that compensatory services typically are awarded to a student because of a district's or school's failure to implement an IEP. And then the supplemental school closure services. These are related to the extended learning change to our instructional environment that has occurred as a result of COVID-19. Once we know what the impact of the school closure has been on all students, then we'll talk about what additional things or how we're going to assess students with disabilities. So, the first thing that will happen is you'll get guidance on how we're going to assess this impact on all students, whether it's going to be additional summer camps or activities or whatever that's going to be, and how this will be assessed for all students. We'll talk about then what that will look like for students with disabilities, and whether additional supplemental services will need to be provided to students with disabilities. We don't know what those might look like until school reopens, and we know how we're going to assess the impact of the closure on all students. All right, questions about those clarifications? And again, that's what we've talked about the last couple of weeks. Again, the superintendents and instructional SCASA instructional leaders roundtable folks, I think, have been asking a couple of questions. So I offer you those 3 slides if you need to use, and you are welcome to use any of these slides or presentations with anybody else. Sandy, any other questions before we go on to the survey results?
No.
Okay. All right, Nicole?
We had all of you complete a brief survey prioritizing some things. Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was going to say, since everybody's muted, I'm not sure who I should call out for an answer. We had asked for a little bit of data, and we wanted to share it with you guys, and then just kind of share what we are doing with it, or how that impacts what we're doing next. So we did ask about budget priorities. These are all of the categories that we asked about, and this will just give you a good idea of what your peers are looking at and how you stack up with your peers. Now, obviously, since there were 87 different answers, I believe, this is a combination of everybody's answers or how they prioritized. But in general, supplemental services and how to do supplemental services or how to budget for supplemental services was the #1 priority among all of you. And then the summer instructional opportunities, how can we work that into a budget as well? And I know, listening to both the Accelerate Ed and a bunch of the stuff we are seeing online, and the discussion that we've had just now, the summer instructional opportunities are really getting difficult to plan for without knowing exactly if there will still be social distancing in place and things like that. And then just, you guys can see the rest here. Staff development related to possible future closures, or maybe instruction on that blended learning or virtual learning was not a priority, but the lowest prioritized among everybody. Next slide, Becky. So this is the question we asked about the way you guys would like to receive guidance, or the type of guidance that you want. So again, this is the same way. 1 would be your first priority, 7 being your least important priority or least pressing matter. This is not all of the things we asked you guys about. These are the ones that had that were statistically significant, that you guys definitely wanted. And this is the part that we are going to put into guidance. So there is a COVID-19 stakeholder group for students with disabilities. We meet every Monday, and we are currently working on a set of guidance. Becky, I've asked you for control. I'm going to share the table of contents with that, if I could. Let me.
I bestow the control upon you.
You did. You are correct. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so this is that slide that Becky just had up about the results from the survey, about the way or the type that you want, the way or type of guidance that you want. This is then generated the table of contents for the guidance that COVID stakeholder group is putting out. And I just wanted to kind of show you the table of contents. It's completely a work in progress and not ready to go. But you can see it's coming along. We've got quite a bit of different guidance going on in here, including, let me take you down to this. How to determine those supplemental services. And again, this is a draft, a very drafty draft, very early in the process. But we thought it was important that you guys see what is coming out of those surveys so that, we are listening and we do something with all of those surveys that we do. And then our stakeholder group, that's all the stuff in red there. And then we're just working through how that guidance will look. So Becky, if you want to go ahead and put the slide back up, you can take control back. More than anything, we just wanted to let you guys know some very specific stuff is coming in writing, and we are working with stakeholders. I did not put up who those stakeholders were, and I should have, but it does include multiple districts, both large and small, and representatives from Clemson, representatives from Task, representatives from USC, from our, oh gosh, who else?
Parent advocacy groups.
Yes, I was going to say Family
preschool
Connections,
group.
Family Connections, Protection and Advocacy, and the Advisory Council for Educating Students with Disabilities. So that is what we are doing with those survey results. And I will hand it back over to, I don't know if it goes to Becky or to Carolyn now.
Carolyn, you're on.
I am on. Just a couple of quick additional reminders. We are having our Indicator 14 webinar tomorrow for those districts that opted to participate and contact those students themselves as a means of increasing their district's response rate. And that's going to be at 11 o'clock tomorrow. I did send the poll out for the ESY to determine whether or not districts would have their reports ready by the June 12th date, which is the latest possible date that we can turn around the numbers and get it to finance so that they could distribute your the funds for that. This is just reporting the numbers to us and the number of kids that you will need to provide services to by June 12th. If you don't see the voting poll button in the email banner, just reply with a yes or no or maybe, just so that I can get those totals back by our next meeting. Also, and it's not written here, but for those districts that are getting the pre-check response back, please be sure that your corrections or get those corrections back to the source so that the next time we run the report, it will run correctly. So the purpose of the pre-checks is so that you can get your data created or corrected at the source of where the errors are. And I think that's all that I have for additional reminders. As of now, we still have no deadlines or extensions or informations about possible extensions for our data reporting. So our timelines are as previously reported on our calendars. Back to you, Becky.
And that's a good lead in, Carolyn. I will tell y'all that the NASD call this week was canceled. We had anticipated having some further guidance on data reporting requirements from OSAP. That has not come out. There is discussion among states about making our own decision, making our own decisions, and it's ranged from anything from we're not going to collect Indicator 8, which is the parent survey on whether or not parents felt they were included in IEP meetings. So some states are considering not collecting that this year, to just taking out some of the compliance indicators like Indicator 11, the 60-day timeline, or Indicator 12, the C to B transition, taking those out of any of the determinations that are made. And so we will probably be surveying you about that, and it may be that we make a state level decision about some of that. With the ESY poll, we're asking you, will you be able to send the numbers by the June date? In making decisions, we're trying again to take into considerations what you're doing, what you're having difficulty with, and where we're going with that, and how we could best support you. I'm going to close. We'll get to questions.
One additional
Go
question,
ahead.
Becky. There was a question someone asked about who they should send the pre-checks to. Pre-checks was submitted, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago for indicators 7, 11, and 12. And Yolanda and Andrea, I know Andrea has sent her responses out, and Yolanda was in the process, if she has not submitted them already, returned those pre-checks back to the district. So that window closed a couple of weeks ago for the pre-checks.
If you feel like you need that extended, let Carolyn know, and that is something we can talk about. No promises, but we are trying to give as much targeted and temporary flexibility as we can with everything. I did want to make you aware of a new technical assistance center. It's called Progress Center, and it can be found at promotingprogress.org. Promoting Progress, all one word, PROMOTING promotingprogress.org. And it's a new OSEP, excuse me, OSEP funded website that has information, resources, and support for local education folks who are responsible for the development and implementation of high quality educational programming for students with disabilities. It does really come out of the Andrew F. Decision, and again, looking at access to, making reasonable progress from, but it's got some good information already. This is where you will find the virtual IEP meeting tip sheets that we talked about, and resources to support some continuity during this time, continuity of learning. But I would encourage you to look at that, promotingprogress.org, and we'll put that on our website as well. Sandy, any questions at this point?
No, not at this point. Someone did ask if there was going to be if there were questions were going to be addressed that were in the chat. So I just asked if there was a specific one that we may have missed. So I'm just waiting to see if I get a response to that.
I can tell you that the questions that we've gotten along the flexibility, extending into summer, what that can be used from, we will add that to our frequently asked questions responses on the website as well. And certainly the link to submit questions specific to this is still active on the website. So if you think of something after the call, don't hesitate to submit through that. If it's a more individual student specific question, then if you'll email one of us.
And Rita, this is Nicole to answer your questions about the activities prior to school starting. In the guidance at this time, it includes how you're communicating out with your parents about how school will start, how you're communicating out with, oh, did I say parents or students? Students and parents about the start of school, how you will, we very explicitly say that parents of students with disabilities have been hearing rumors that their children are going to be denied services. So it's about communicating out with them, about district leaders, district special education leaders working with instructional folks up front, so you guys know how all of gen ed is being measured, so that you guys are able to get that data in a timely manner to make some of those decisions, and just this transition and how the transition will go. And then also some of the data that you can be looking at up front. So in theory, everyone should have data from the end of the first 9 weeks, and everyone should be doing the very best they can to get points of data during this time. And special ed teachers can be working to develop some of those trend lines based on the data they have, and then would have to incorporate once school comes back. There's some of that data review that can happen. It's mostly the activities beforehand, are related to communication with important stakeholders, and the early gathering of data.
All right, other questions, Sandy?
No, I think we're good.
As always, I appreciate your time, what you're doing, the work you've put into this. Please make sure that you communicate, especially during this National Teacher Appreciation Week, all the hard work that everyone is putting into this. I was on the Accelerate ED call this morning and listened to Patrick Kelly, who is a teacher at Blythewood High School in Richland, too, do such an eloquent job of talking about the effort that teachers and district staff have put in over these last weeks in developing not just instruction, but a whole new way to provide instructional opportunities for students. And it's just been incredible to watch what has actually happened. And I think I'll speak personally, but sometimes I tend to get so wrapped up in the one person who is unhappy with what's going on for whatever reason. And I try to make sure that I'm looking at the big picture and looking at the incredible effort that everyone has made during this time, teachers, staff, parents, just everybody, in trying to deal with something that we didn't know what it was, still don't know what it's going to be like over the next couple of weeks or what impact it will have. So please know that I appreciate everything that everyone is doing, and we will talk to you next week. Thanks.